Okay.
Hello everyone, my name is Lami Ilori, many of you know me as Lami. Today I'll be talking to you about the social and economic impacts of the IMF and World Bank in African countries. Many of you don't know what the IMF or what the World Bank is, but hopefully through this presentation I hope to enlighten you and give you a reason to care. So, when the average person thinks of Africa, they think of exhilarating safaris, rich diverse culture, wild and tame forests, malaria, Ebola, the usual stereotypes. Unfortunately, as blessed as we are, we're arguably masters of our own demise, plagued by bad government, religious intolerance, and ethnic indifference. The wars have left wounds that time can't simply heal. So, malaria and low literacy rates are only a speck of sand in the beaches of problems African countries face, and more specifically sub-Saharan countries. Well, thanks to the World Bank and the IMF, an organization has been put in place to help us. This is when the IMF and World Bank come in place. The IMF stands for the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank is just the World Bank. These organizations are a complete last resort for countries to turn to in times of famine, drought, and other economic challenges. When people think the World Bank is just a loan to give money, but as far as they come, they also suggest policies that help the country improve economically. Policies such as trade liberalization, privatization, high interest. Again, many of you don't know what any of these policies are, but trust me, they're crippling to underdeveloped economy. Okay, first let's talk about trade liberalization. Firstly, trade liberalization is the removal of restriction on exchange goods between nations. Basically, this means open up your markets for the economists in the room. I'm sure your heads are thinking, well, this kind of is good because all the resources African countries have, they can use to exchange and improve economically. But this is true in an ideal setting. In a real world where anything can affect oil prices, which is very important in an African economy. So, for underdeveloped countries, trade liberalization has some serious effects. It can lead to the dumping of cheap and substandard products, such as clothes, shoes, creams, even medicine. Can you imagine medicine, substandard medicine? What is meant to use to cure people is not even, quality isn't added to it. So it's dumped in African countries and it's usually not helped. So this basically undermines local industries that try to produce the same products or even try to produce the same products at least. Now I'll try to bring it up to make it a little bit more relatable. Now I want you to meet Tito. Tito is a farmer, and Tito makes lemonade. So how many of you have had lemonade here? I like lemonade. You like lemonade? Okay. So Tito barely gets along. He has a roof over his head, a lemonade stand. Everything's going fairly well for Tito. He's fine. He's happy. But then Minute Maid moves in. Who has Minute Maid? Likes Minute Maid? I like Minute Maid. Okay, so Minute Maid moves in right next to Tito. Yeah, right next to Tito. And Minute Maid has a 50-acre farm. Tito has his backyard. Minute Maid has 200 employees. Tito has himself and maybe his son. Minute Maid has a walk-in fridge, 3 walk-in fridges that keep the lemonade cool. Tito has to get ice from his neighbor Kuti. So obviously the customers flow directly to the Minute Maid farm and get all the lemonade they need for the hot, climate that is usually in the equator of in African countries. So they're both selling the same products, but it takes a minute to make one and 2 hours to make another, and usually it's not even fresh. So I ask you, is this fair? Is this leveling the playing field? Are these policies crippling or aiding the African economy? So in usual cases, a country doesn't run on lemonade like America runs on Dunkin'. This is usually with respect to imported food like rice, wheat, milk, the usual. Developed countries have excess of all these, but lower the prices and import them and export them to African countries as a way of getting rid of them. Now, how many of you have had Tito's lemonade? None of you. Even I haven't had Tito's lemonade. Because I only explained to you the short-term effects of Tito's condition. Eventually, Tito will have to close down his shop and move and have to will go work in one of the factories, such as Coca-Cola or Minute Maid or any other factories. You see, I have nothing against any of these multinational corporations, but the fact is that the policies that IMF impose in African countries don't allow the countries to assist domestic industries like Tito's shop, but instead profit multinational corporations. So keep in mind that this domestic industry are like Tito's. So what happens? Where's the food? If these situations are not conditioned or controlled, Africa will never be able to make its own food. Now let's talk about another policy that is constantly imposed in African countries, privatization. This is when there's a transfer of ownership of property or business from the government to the private sector. Now you're thinking, well, Lami, this is kind of good because there's bad governments most times in African countries, and when the people have control of their business, it helps. But the fact is that most people invest a lot in the businesses, which is good because they have a lot to lose. That means that many people get laid off, and this increases in unemployment rates, crime rates, disapproval rating among governments. This makes things very expensive. Basic things like education, things that you're entitled to in Canada. So in Tito's case, people have to choose which kid to send to school. And most illiterate people will prefer their son to send their son to school. So Tito will have to send his son to school with his daughter. This would therefore increase illiteracy rates among women in the country. So how did we get here? From a lemonade stand business gone wrong to literacy rates among women? Could the IMF see this coming? Did the World Bank see this coming? Truth be told, that no one could, except you're part of the affected population. Now, how can we solve this? Why? The IMF is largely controlled by the US, Germany, Japan, other major world powers. For example, the US controls about 17 to 18% of the voting rights in the IMF decision making. That's kind of equivalent to, let's just say, grade 9s having the largest say and veto power on who becomes prefect. See that unfair? Shouldn't it be grade 12s kind of? But most people don't agree with that. So you would think this kind of school has a fix, some kind of fix. But unfortunately, the IMF has no accountability. It's kind of secretive. The IMF works with a select group of bankers and ministers that make policies without the input of the government agencies like health, education, environmental departments, and whatnot. So what needs to be done? How can we change for the better? First of all, like all success stories go, it has to start with freedom. We should give the African government sovereignty to formulate their own development plans and economic policies, of course within reason. We should end all IMF and World Bank policies that hinder people's access to food, clean water, healthcare, education, and rights organization. Policies such as privatization. Once this is firmly in place, the IMF shouldn't spread itself too thin. It shouldn't take on small parts of the continent itself. For example, only West Africa, or East Africa, or the Sub-Saharan Africa, or just North Africa itself. Focus on the initial initiative by monitoring the International Monetary Fund, and perhaps have emergency loans for the country. Invest in new scientific projects and development for other scientific investments, such as malaria vaccine. So you think that malaria is really prominent? Well, it's not really prominent in North America here, but in Africa it's really prominent. So you would think that with such large population, medical teams would try to make a vaccine because they have such a huge gap, but it doesn't. They don't make that because it doesn't affect a large amount of people. So I have a video to show you a short video that kind of highlights how to improve such situations. always remember that assisting African countries isn't a business transaction, it's an opportunity to overcome poverty. We should always remember that overcoming poverty isn't an act of charity, it's an act of justice. And without the fundamental fix-up of the IMF, World Bank, and other key institutions, the cause of international development continues to suffer. So when someone tells you, finish your food because there's starving kids in Africa, you look at them and tell them that giving food to African kids won't create success in Africa, but the opportunities for them to make their own food will. Thank you.